Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and we're continuing our series with the Dark Elf faction focus, and we're now looking at part 2 of the special units. As a reminder, this is being done for the Old World. We're looking at 8th edition Dark Elf army book. We're looking at how the units played, what rules they had, and how that might influence their rules in Warhammer The Old World. We know there is a Dark Elf list coming in Legendary format, at least. I know it won't be updated, but we do know they've been playing older editions of Warhammer to influence what rules might come out. So I thought it'd be interesting to see how they looked in the 8th edition, which was the last edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. So as we look then into what special units we haven't covered so far, we have the Reaper Bolt Thrower, which is the only artillery unit for the Dark Elves. It's got above average ballistic skill and leadership. Equipment-wise, they come with a hand weapon and light armor. Now, they come as a unit size of 1, but you could only have a maximum of 4 in your army. So there was actually a stated limitation in the book. Special rules wise, they've got the basic ones, which means, if a skirmisher is going to charge them, they're going to have to deal with it and always strikes first. But they've got the Reaper Bolt Thrower. So there is a basic bolt thrower profile in the army book, which is you get one shot, 48 inches, strength 6, and it ignores armor, D3 wounds, and then it can pierce ranks. So if you kill the first model, it goes into the next rank at -1 strength, and you get to try and kill a model at strength 5, then you do the same at strength 4 until you fail to kill a model. Now, the Reaper Bolt Thrower has an additional firing mode, which is 6 shots at the same range, strength 4, armor piercing. So they get an additional AP, so they've got an AP of -2. Which is only a single wound. So, but it does mean that it gives it a huge amount of flexibility if shooting at units that have only 1 or 2 ranks, for example, particularly if they're lower strength models. So you can still get value of this shooting those sort of cheaper skirmishing units as you can for shooting those tougher units where you need the single shot, the additional strength, or the multiple wounds, or a unit that has quite a few ranks. So definitely giving it the flexibility that some bolt thrower units don't have. So I saw this in nearly every Dark Elf army, at least one. I normally ran 2. Though I do like shooty armies and I gravitate towards that sort of gunline style more than anything. Flexibility, we've talked about. Same vulnerabilities as other artillery units, But the one thing is, if you're going to send like a small unit of vampire counts, wolves, or bats or something to deal with this, and they are a small unit, the crew will still get to fight first. So, you risk taking a couple of casualties, and does that mean you fail to kill the unit another turn where the unit's locked in combat or something? So not to be written off, but they do have those similar vulnerabilities. Next up is the Harpies. Above average attacks, but they have low pretty much everything else. They got no equipment, they got a 5+ unit size, and the only special rule is they can fly, so they don't get any of the other Dark Elf special rules. I mean, in reality, this was a rarely seen unit in my meta and local gaming groups. It's a small, weak skirmishing unit whose only benefit is fly, but you don't get the always fights first. You don't get the Murderous Prowess, which is the reroll wound rolls of 1 in close combat. I never use this unit. And the model itself is more expensive than an Executioner and is the same as a Blackguard. So there just were so many better options in the book. A strongly not recommended unit in 8th edition. It remains to be seen if these guys can be upped for the Old World, if they're even included. Next up, we have the Scourge Runner Chariot. So Scourge Runner Chariot there, above average movement for a chariot. And that is because it's being pulled by dark steeds instead of the cold ones. But it does have a low toughness, and its save is only 5+ for a chariot. So that's something to consider. Equipment, though, it does have a hand weapon, a repeater crossbow, and a spear, and a Ravager harpoon. Now, the Ravager harpoon, essentially, it's a mini bolt thrower. It's got a strength of 7. But only a range of 24. So half the range, but does have 1 extra strength. Multiple wounds, D3. And if it does wound a monster, it can then drag the monster D6 inches towards the firer. And if it drags it more than 3 inches, that monster suffers an additional wound. So it's got a unit size of 1 and basic special rules. This is an interesting unit. It's basically a mounted bolt thrower. It can move and shoot. It allows to do that. It is faster, but less durable than a Cold One chariot. The problem is the special mechanic works only on monsters. And in reality, that meant they were more limited in popularity in the local meta. Which was... There was a lot more infantry blocks than there were big monsters on the table. That's how it was in the 8th edition in my local area. So without a load of monsters in there, you lose that benefit of that unique mechanic. And still quite expensive. It's only 10 points cheaper than a War Hydra or a Charybdis. Which probably I could get more value from, and the fact that the bolt thrower aspect of it as only 24-inch range meant you were then pretty much in range of nearly everyone else's archers, not just their artillery. So you'd probably want to then go back to the Reaper bolt thrower. So that was the Scourge Runner Chariot. I think limited value overall. Limited value overall. But next up, and the final one of the special units, is an absolute staple of the Dark Elves going way back, and it is the War Hydra. What you can see in the picture here is the latest incarnation of the War Hydra, which is a dual kit with the Charybdis. Now, stats-wise, overall, it's got quite average stats. I mean, nothing to write home about except its attacks. Movement is not particularly high, around 6 inches, and incredibly low initiative, which means it's not going to be fighting first. And you'll notice, special rules-wise, it's one of the units in the Dark Elf roster that doesn't have always strikes first. Equipment-wise, you can take Fiery Breath, which is a strength 4 breath weapon with flaming attacks, or Spitfire, where it's got an 8-inch shot. Strength 4, strength and number of shots as per wounds remaining, right? So it's got 5 wounds, so you could get strength 5 and 5 shots with the Spitfire, but every wound you take would reduce that for extra points. In reality, most people I know, and me personally, I took the breath weapon. It comes in a unit size of 1. Special rules wise, it's got a bunch of ones specific to it. So if one head is severed, so it starts with a base of 3 attacks, and it gets +1 for each remaining wound. Right? It starts with 5 wounds, and therefore it's got 8 attacks. And then you've got another takes its place, which, if the model's alive at the end of your turn, roll the number of d6 equal to lost wounds. And it's not just lost wounds in that combat, it's lost wounds total. So even if you lost them in previous rounds, previous turns, it's whatever the missing number of wounds is from the original, you take that number of d6 and you roll them. Each 4+ regains 1 wound. All right? So it's not quite as powerful as regeneration, which is done if you fail your armor save. But you do have a level of regeneration in the model. It is a large target, so you can't get cover modifiers for it. Has a scaly skin, so it's got a 4+ save, and it does cause terror. which basically means it's immune to psychology. You get all the benefits of causing fear as well, and any unit that it charges must take a panic test, which if they fail, that unit then must flee as their charge reaction. So this is probably a model or the previous incarnation that most Dark Elf players own. I actually have both the previous and this one. The previous one being an absolute nightmare in metal, trying to get that to stay together. This model, however, is actually very nice. And it's the classic Dark Elf monster. It is reasonably durable with its own form of regeneration, and the 8 attacks with the breath weapon make it a great monster for going after infantry and cavalry units. So units with lots of models that aren't necessarily got loads of wounds, that aren't necessarily high toughness and loads of armor, this thing is great against. Though it is limited by its low speed and initiative, and it would struggle against other monsters and so on due to its lack of strength and AP. So this is a sort of monster that you're going to use either combined with another unit. You can imagine using the anvil of a Black Guard unit and then having them supported with a War Hydra would be incredibly potent, particularly with that breath attack as well. So a good unit, regularly seen, and given that my meta was a lot more infantry units, big blocks of infantry than monsters, the War Hydras were very popular and very common. And that brings us to the end of our part 2, looking at the Dark Elf special units in 8th edition. It remains to be seen, will the War Hydra still be the anti-infantry monster in Warhammer The Old World, or will they change it up? It remains to be seen. If you enjoyed the video, though, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down and let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more content, please hit that subscribe button. It's totally free for you to do, and yet it means a lot for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you all very soon.